Hey everyone, it was great to meet you all in your posts last week. Thank you for taking the time to both tell us about yourself and then also to respond to others and to get to know each other. It's really important in an online class, especially one that focuses on communication, to be able to interact with your peers. And the discussion boards are so important for that. So thank you for taking your time there. Next week's discussion board, or I guess that's this week, will be a little bit more intense as far as content. So you will need to spend time first understanding the content and then pushing the content in your discussion post and having really interesting conversations. So I expect that there will be a lot of back and forth where you will say something and your peers will say something and then you'll respond to their message. And so that's why the first week we just spent getting to know each other, because it is important that you're able to have these relationships even though it's only digital. I know going through the names that I've had a few of you in some of my classes, but for those of you who haven't had me, I've been teaching at UConn now for the past 4 years. This is my first time doing an online class though, so I'm excited to go through this process. Please feel free to reach out to me via email or through Canvas, or if we need to, we can set up a time to Skype, especially if you're struggling with a concept or two. So definitely stay in touch with me. That is our way of making sure we're on the same page and that you're getting all the information you need. I did want to go over a few things that I would like you to focus on for Module 2. So this video, I'm just going to briefly jump through some of the chapters, some of the things that I think are important for you to understand as you prepare for the first test. And I'll try to do this for each module. I'll just review what to expect for the week and how you can be successful for the exam. Alright, so this module we cover 5 different chapters. I did want to make a quick note. My textbook, and I don't know if it's the same for yours, but my textbook came in and the chapters are different than they were before. So the chapters are wrong. So it's really important when you're studying, focus on the page numbers. So within each of the calendars for the week, each module shows a calendar and what's expected for that week. Pay attention to the page numbers. Focus on the page numbers. Don't worry so much about the chapter number. Alright, so this week we're going to go through 5 different chapters. The first chapter that I want you to focus on starts on page 1. So this is the process of human communication. Here I really want you to focus on how we define communication. You really need to understand that broadly and then how we're looking at that within this course. So make sure you're focusing on how it's defined. I also want you to be able to recognize and remember the different aspects of the communication model. Okay, so that will be things like sender, the receiver, the noise, messages. Focus on those different areas, be able to define them and give an example of each of them. I also want you to look at what makes communication effective. Okay, so those are all things from that first chapter that I want you to really focus on. Of course, you should be reading all of it, but those are some key takeaways that I want you to be looking at. The second chapter starts on page 33. So this is the chapter looking at perceptions. This is a really important chapter because a lot of people struggle with communication simply because they're communicating with people who have different perceptions than they do. All right, so you can think of these as having different glasses or different lenses that allow us to see the world differently. And so as you read through this chapter, think about what are your own lenses, what are some own world views that you have that change the way that you interpret communication from other people. So here I want you to look at how we use communication to build our identities. So what sort of identities we have, whether you consider yourself maybe religious or not religious, whether you consider yourself academic or not, whether you consider yourself to be an athlete or not. Those are all different identities that we have that are built by the communication we participate in with other people. I also want you to focus on how our individual perceptions then influence our communication. Okay, so think back to the different parts of the communication model. How does my perception of myself change how I'm going to interpret other people's communication to me? And how is it going to change how I communicate with other people? I also want you to introduce yourself to several communication concepts within that chapter, such as expressiveness, attraction, charisma. All of these are different variables that we consider in communication that change how people communicate with one another. Okay. The third chapter I want you to focus on starts on page 69, and it looks at verbal messages. Here I want you to focus on understanding how we use symbols to communicate with people verbally. Symbols can be a wide variety of things, from the pictures we draw to the languages we use, even the way that I express words out of my mouth. These can all be symbols that allow us to communicate. So if you think of communication as the process of getting thoughts from my mind into your mind, I have to shift those thoughts into symbols and send those symbols to you. Right now I'm doing that through the words that I'm speaking, so verbally. You then have to hear those verbal symbols and interpret them back into your own thoughts. So good communication is done in a way that allows my thoughts to equal your thoughts at the end. Okay, so think about symbols that we use. For example, if I say tree, that is a symbol. However, it's a very ambiguous symbol, because when I say tree, I might be thinking about a Christmas tree, and one of you might be thinking about a pine tree. I know we have somebody in class who's down in Florida right now. And so as we are communicating with people from different parts of the world, these symbols might mean something different. So we might have to adapt the way we use the symbols in order to be more effective. Okay? I also want you to look at the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis here. This is the concept that suggests that the languages we use determine what we are able to think about. So as we learn more symbols, we're able to have deeper and more important thought. A couple other words I want you to look at. I want you to understand what is abstraction, what is ambiguous, and what is arbitrary. And look at how language is all of those three things. So the language we use is abstract, it is ambiguous, and it is arbitrary. So go and focus on those within the chapter. Okay. The fourth chapter I want you to focus on looks at nonverbal messages. So this chapter starts at page 119. Here I want you to understand what's the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. How are they similar and how are they different? So really understand those different definitions. Then I want you to be able to define and recognize nonverbal cues. Okay? Nonverbal cues are the things that we do nonverbally that signify or cue to somebody that we are trying to communicate something. Right? So this can be something like eye contact. That's a nonverbal cue. It could be something like tilting our head. That's a nonverbal cue that we're listening. Right? So focus on those different nonverbal cues. And then I also want you to learn about personal space and interpersonal distance. So how do we communicate with distance? When I'm sitting close to somebody, what does that communicate? When I walk away from somebody, what does that communicate? So focus on those within that chapter. Then the last chapter I want you to focus on this module is the small group communication chapter, and that starts on page 259. Some important things to focus on here are groupthink, group development stages, types of groups, and decision-making processes. Okay, so I really want you to understand, how do we form groups, how does communication play a part in that, and how does communication help us to make decisions as a group. So those are all very important things. And then groupthink is sort of the hot topic or hot button topic that people consider when they talk about group communication. The concept that as groups we tend to make false decisions or bad decisions because we tend to think that other people in the group are doing the work, and therefore we sit back and relax. So go and focus on those things. Alright, so those are the 5 chapters I want you to focus on this module. That is a lot, so I want you to get on it quickly. I would suggest maybe studying 1 chapter each day so that you don't get confused. So if you start today with the first chapter and then you work your way till Friday when you cover the last chapter, and then you take your test Friday night. Of course, you're welcome to go in and take the test now if you'd like to. You can do that at any point, but you can't retake the test. So make sure that you've covered all of this information before you go on to take the test. Of course, shoot me an email if you have any questions. I will sometime in the next couple of days post another video talking about the individual major assignments. So we have the 1,000 words project that we want you to cover, and we also have the podcast project. Both of those are fairly self-explanatory, and you should be able to recognize what you need to do there just by reading the assignment details. But I will make individual videos about them just to explain my expectations a little bit more. All right, good luck this week. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.